Behind closed doors and inside quiet offices, questions were asked that powerful people never wanted to be answered. Files were gone, notes had vanished, hard drives were wiped clean, and then those asking the questions vanished. These weren't criminals or fugitives. They were whistleblowers who uncovered dangerous truths, and when they were found, the most important evidence had vanished with them. They exposed the truth, then the evidence vanished. Story 1. In the mid-1990s, as political tensions simmered quietly beneath the surface of American life, a journalist followed a trail few were willing to touch. His reporting reached into court documents, intelligence records, and overlooked testimony, raising questions about how deeply power and secrecy could intertwine. Years later, far from the headlines that once surrounded him, Gary Webb would fade from public view under circumstances that continue to provoke debate and unease. Gary Stephen Webb was born on August 31, 1955, in Corona, California. Raised in a military family, he moved frequently during childhood before eventually settling in the Midwest. From an early age, Webb showed a talent for writing and a strong interest in accountability journalism. He began his reporting career in local newspapers, steadily building a reputation for in-depth investigations into corruption, crime, and government oversight. By the 1980s, Webb had earned multiple journalism awards and joined the San Jose Mercury News, where his investigative work helped contribute to the paper's Pulitzer Prize-winning coverage of the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. Colleagues described him as determined, detail-oriented, and relentless in his pursuit of facts. He was married, had 3 children, and was known for his intense work ethic and uncompromising standards. In 1996, Webb published Dark Alliance, a multi-part investigative series examining how drug traffickers linked to Nicaragua's Contra rebels contributed to the spread of high-value illegal substances in Los Angeles. The article suggested that U.S. intelligence agencies may have overlooked or mishandled information related to these activities. The series drew massive public attention, particularly within affected communities. However, the response from major media outlets and government institutions was swift and critical. Several newspapers challenged Webb's conclusions, and internal reviews at his own publication questioned aspects of the reporting. Although portions of his findings were later supported by official investigations, Webb's professional reputation suffered significantly. By 1997, he resigned from the Mercury News. In the years that followed, he struggled to regain his footing in mainstream journalism. He took investigative work for state agencies and later joined a small alternative newspaper. Financial strain, professional isolation, and lingering controversy followed him. On December 10, 2004, Webb was found dead in his California home. Authorities ruled Webb's death a suicide, stating that he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The official investigation found no evidence of outside involvement or foul play. Those close to him confirmed he'd been under emotional and financial stress in the years leading up to his death. Despite this, questions persisted. Some observers pointed to the intense backlash Webb faced after Dark Alliance, arguing that the collapse of his career and public credibility had taken a severe personal toll. Others noted the unusual nature of the case and questioned whether all circumstances had been fully examined. Government investigations conducted years earlier acknowledged flaws in law enforcement oversight, but rejected claims of direct conspiracy. No evidence has ever surfaced to overturn the official ruling. Still, the combination of professional isolation, unresolved controversy, and the lasting impact of his reporting continues to fuel speculation. Webb's death deeply affected his family, friends, and supporters. His former wife publicly stated that she believed his death was the result of despair rather than external harm. His children later worked to preserve his journalistic legacy, ensuring his work remained accessible to the public. Among fellow journalists, Webb's story became a cautionary tale, one that highlighted both the importance of investigative reporting and the personal cost that sometimes accompanies it. Over time, perspectives on his work softened, and many acknowledged that while some claims were disputed, his efforts sparked necessary public scrutiny. What if Gary Webb's investigation had received broader institutional support instead of resistance? And what if the full truth behind his findings and his final years remains buried beneath silence? Story 2. In the early hours of a quiet Los Angeles morning, a speeding car tore through the darkness and vanished in a burst of fire. Within seconds, one of America's most fearless journalists was gone. There were no witnesses who could explain what truly happened. Only questions, fragments of evidence, and a career defined by exposing powerful truths. Michael Mahan. Hastings was born on January 28, 1980, in Malone, New York. Raised in a politically aware and intellectually active household, he developed a strong sense of curiosity and independence at a young age. He later attended New York University, where he studied journalism and quickly distinguished himself as a driven writer, unafraid of difficult subjects. Hastings rose to national prominence through his work as a war correspondent. He reported extensively from Iraq and Afghanistan, embedding with U.S. military units and documenting the human cost of modern warfare. His career was forever shaped by the death of his fiancée, Andrea Parhamovich, who was killed in a 2007 ambush in Baghdad while working for a humanitarian organization. The tragedy led Hastings to write "I Lost My Love in Baghdad," a deeply personal account of grief, war, and disillusionment. His fearless reporting style brought him to Rolling Stone, where he published his most famous piece in 2010, "The Runaway General." The article exposed candid remarks by General Stanley McChrystal and his inner circle, ultimately leading to McChrystal's resignation. The story earned Hastings a George Polk Award and solidified his reputation as one of the most influential journalists of his generation. Following that success, Hastings became increasingly outspoken about government surveillance, military power, and press freedom. He openly criticized the Obama administration, calling its treatment of journalists a threat to democracy. In his final months, he wrote articles condemning the expansion of drone warfare and government secrecy. Friends and colleagues later recalled that Hastings believed he was being watched. He sent emails shortly before his death, claiming he was working on a major investigation and needed to go off the radar. Some recipients said his tone seemed urgent and unsettled. Despite these concerns, Hastings continued working. His final article, published just days before his death, criticized political surveillance and questioned the direction of American intelligence operations. On June 18, 2013, at approximately 4:25 a.m., Hastings' Mercedes-Benz sped through a residential street in Los Angeles' Hancock Park neighborhood. Witnesses reported the vehicle traveling at extreme speed before slamming into a palm tree and bursting into flames. The impact was so violent that the engine was reportedly ejected from the car. Hastings was pronounced dead at the scene. Authorities quickly ruled the death an accident, citing excessive speed. Toxicology reports later revealed traces of THC and methamphetamine, though officials stated the levels were unlikely to have caused impairment. The official conclusion was blunt: a tragic crash, no foul play. Almost immediately, doubts surfaced. Friends noted that Hastings had expressed fear that his car was being tampered with. A neighbor later claimed Hastings had asked to borrow her car hours before the crash, saying he did not feel safe driving his own. WikiLeaks confirmed Hastings had contacted one of its lawyers shortly before his death. Even former U.S. intelligence officials publicly acknowledged that modern vehicles could theoretically be hacked remotely, though no evidence confirmed such a scenario occurred. The FBI denied investigating Hastings. His family later stated they believed his death was the result of emotional distress and exhaustion rather than conspiracy. His brother, who had arrived in Los Angeles to help him seek treatment, said he believed Hastings was in the midst of a manic episode. Still, the timing and Hastings' line of work left many unsettled. Michael Hastings left behind a powerful body of work that reshaped modern political journalism. He was remembered as relentless, passionate, and unwilling to soften the truth. Yet the circumstances of his death remain debated. Was it a tragic accident driven by exhaustion and pressure? Or did his workplace put him in greater danger than anyone realized? More than a decade later, no definitive answers have emerged, and in the silence left behind, one question lingers. What if the story he was about to publish was the one that cost him everything? Story 3. On a humid August morning in 1991, a hotel room in Martinsburg, West Virginia, became the center of a mystery that still unsettles investigators decades later. A journalist had arrived in town, chasing a story he believed could expose a vast web of corruption. Within days, he was found dead. What he uncovered, and who he may have crossed, would remain forever unanswered. Joseph Daniel Casolaro was born on June 16, 1947, in McLean, Virginia. Raised in a large Catholic family, he grew up curious, ambitious, and intellectually driven. He attended Providence College and later married Terrell Pace, a former Miss Virginia with whom he had a son. Though the marriage ended, Casolaro remained devoted to his child. He worked as a freelance writer and publisher, running several computer industry newsletters through the 1980s. While not widely famous, he was persistent, deeply curious, and fascinated by government secrecy. Friends described him as idealistic, stubborn, and intensely focused when pursuing a story. By 1990, Casolaro had turned his attention to what he believed was the biggest investigation of his life. Casolaro became consumed by a story he called the Octopus, a theory suggesting that multiple political scandals, including the Iran-Contra affair, the Inslaw software case, and international financial corruption, were connected by a hidden network of power brokers. In August 1991, he traveled to Martinsburg, West Virginia, telling friends he was meeting a key source who would provide proof tying everything together. In the days before his trip, he reportedly told family members that he'd been receiving threatening phone calls and warned them that if anything happened to him, it would not be an accident. On August 10, 1991, hotel staff discovered Danny Casolaro unresponsive in the bathtub of his room at the Sheraton Hotel. He was alone, and a handwritten note was found nearby. After a brief investigation, authorities concluded the case without pursuing additional leads, a decision that would later raise lingering questions and fuel years of debate. Authorities concluded there were no signs of forced entry or struggle. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as blood loss from self-inflicted wounds. A second autopsy later reached the same conclusion. Yet inconsistencies troubled investigators and family members alike. Casolaro was known to be squeamish around blood. His notes and research files, materials he never traveled without, were missing. Witnesses reported strange phone calls made to his home before his trip, some of them threatening. Even more puzzling, a mysterious military officer appeared at Casolaro's funeral, placed a medal on his coffin, and left without identifying himself. Casolaro's notes referenced intelligence agencies, arms dealers, and alleged misuse of surveillance software. Some investigators later suggested he had been misled by unreliable sources. Others believed he had uncovered something dangerous but lacked corroboration. While federal agencies continued to stand by the official ruling, some individuals involved in the case privately expressed reservations. To this day, portions of the case file remain unavailable to the public, adding to the uncertainty surrounding the final conclusion. Casolaro's family never accepted the official conclusion. His brother later said that Danny had appeared focused and motivated rather than despondent. Friends also recalled his excitement in the days before his death, believing he was close to finishing the story he'd been working toward for months. His death left loved ones grappling with unanswered questions and a sense that crucial evidence had vanished with him. Over time, journalists and filmmakers revisited the case, most recently in the 2024 documentary American Conspiracy: The Octopus Murders, reigniting public interest and debate. Yet despite renewed attention, no definitive answers have emerged. What if Danny Casolaro uncovered something too powerful to publish? And what if the truth disappeared with him that night in Martinsburg? Story 4. In the late summer of 2010, London moved at its usual pace. Crowded streets, hurried commuters, and the quiet anonymity of city life. Inside a secure apartment in Pimlico, however, time seemed to stop. Days passed without movement, unanswered messages accumulated, and concern slowly grew within Britain's intelligence community. When authorities finally entered the flat, what they discovered would become one of the most unsettling and controversial deaths in modern British history. Gareth Wynne Williams was born on September 26, 1978, in Anglesey, Wales. A mathematical prodigy, he entered university at just 17 and later earned a doctorate in mathematics. Quiet, reserved, and intensely private, Williams was known for his discipline and brilliance. He worked for GCHQ, Britain's intelligence and cybersecurity agency, and was later seconded to MI6. Colleagues described him as methodical, deeply intelligent, and uninterested in attention or office politics. Outside of work, he enjoyed cycling, hiking, and solitary routines, living a modest life despite the sensitive nature of his work. In August 2010, Williams failed to report for work. His absence initially raised little concern, as his role involved classified assignments and irregular schedules. But as days passed with no contact, colleagues grew uneasy. On August 23rd, police were asked to conduct a welfare check at his Pimlico flat. Inside, they found no signs of forced entry. In the bathroom, they discovered Williams inside a sports bag placed in the bathtub. He had been missing for approximately a week. The apartment appeared undisturbed, and there were no signs of struggle. The discovery triggered an immediate investigation. Forensic teams found no fingerprints on the bag or lock, and the keys were located inside. The absence of clear forensic evidence complicated the case from the start. Although no injuries suggesting a struggle were found, experts questioned whether it was physically possible for someone to place themselves inside the bag unaided. Independent specialists later stated that such a scenario would have been extremely difficult. The coroner ultimately ruled the death unnatural and likely to have been criminally mediated, concluding that Williams was probably placed in the bag by another person. However, a subsequent police review reached a different conclusion, stating that while unusual, the death was most likely accidental and that no third party could be definitively identified. The investigation was further complicated by the classified nature of Williams's work. Large portions of evidence were withheld on national security grounds. Reports later confirmed that he had been involved in sensitive intelligence operations, including work connected to international cyber activity. Some experts suggested foreign involvement, while others believed the circumstances pointed to an unexplained accident. No theory was ever conclusively proven. Williams' family strongly rejected the idea that his death was accidental. They questioned how crucial evidence could be missing and why it took days for authorities to realize he was gone. The secrecy surrounding his work left them with few answers and many unanswered questions. Over time, they expressed frustration with the investigation and the conflicting conclusions. Despite multiple reviews and public inquiries, they were never given a definitive explanation. Years later, the uncertainty continues to weigh heavily on them. What if the truth about Gareth Williams' final days remains hidden behind classified files and unanswered questions? And what if the full story will only emerge long after those responsible are gone? Story 5. On a quiet Oklahoma highway in November 1974, a single car veered off the road and struck a concrete culvert. The crash appeared sudden, unexplained, and final. Inside the vehicle was a young laboratory technician who had been on her way to meet a journalist with sensitive documents. What should have been an ordinary drive became one of the most debated deaths in American history, surrounded by unanswered questions, missing evidence, and lingering doubt. Karen Gay Silkwood was born on February 19, 1946, in Longview, Texas. Intelligent and determined, she excelled academically and developed an early interest in science. After a brief marriage and 3 children, she moved to Oklahoma, seeking stability and work. In 1972, she was hired as a laboratory technician at the Kerr-McGee nuclear fuel plant near Crescent, Oklahoma, where plutonium fuel rods were manufactured. Silkwood became active in the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union and was later elected to its bargaining committee, the first woman to hold the position at the facility. Colleagues described her as outspoken, principled, and increasingly concerned about safety conditions inside the plant. In the months leading up to her death, Silkwood raised repeated concerns about safety violations, radiation exposure, and the possible falsification of inspection records. She testified before federal officials and gathered documentation related to her findings. On November 13, 1974, she attended a union meeting in Crescent, Oklahoma. Witnesses recalled that she carried a folder of documents and said she was heading to Oklahoma City to meet a New York Times reporter and a union representative. Shortly after leaving the meeting, her car left the roadway and struck a concrete culvert. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The documents she reportedly carried were never found. Authorities initially ruled the crash an accident, suggesting Silkwood had fallen asleep at the wheel. However, inconsistencies quickly emerged. Independent investigators noted unexplained damage to the rear of her vehicle, inconsistent with a simple loss of control. In the days before her death, Silkwood had tested positive for plutonium contamination, both on her body and inside her home. Despite working in areas where such exposure should not have occurred, investigators could not determine how the contamination happened. Some experts believed she may have been exposed deliberately, while others argued it could have been accidental or the result of workplace failures. No definitive explanation was ever reached. Her family later filed a lawsuit against Kerr-McGee, alleging negligence. The company denied wrongdoing, but ultimately settled out of court for $1.38 million without admitting liability. The case raised broader concerns about nuclear safety, whistleblower protection, and corporate accountability. Silkwood's death devastated her family, who struggled for years to uncover the truth. Her parents pursued legal action not only for justice, but to ensure accountability for worker safety. Over time, her story became a symbol of whistleblower courage. Books, investigations, and films brought national attention to her case, yet her family never received a clear explanation of what happened on that road. Decades later, her name remains closely associated with the risks faced by workers who challenge powerful institutions. What if the evidence Karen carried that night had survived the crash and changed the course of nuclear safety history? And what if the full truth behind her final drive remains hidden, lost along that dark stretch of highway? They asked questions that few were willing to ask. They followed paths others warned them not to follow. What they discovered was never fully revealed, and what happened to them remains open to interpretation. No final answers, no certainty, only fragments of truth are left behind in reports, memories, and silence. Years have passed, but the questions remain. And until those answers are found, their stories continue to echo in the shadows. This is Vanished Stories, where the missing are never forgotten.